They tried to silence him. They tried to extinguish the growing flame of Burkina Faso's determination, but their efforts fell short. Ibrahim Traoré, widely seen by many as a symbol of resistance and national pride, continues to stand firm, calm, resolute, and unshaken despite the powerful forces that have aligned against him. After the attempted coup, Traoré did not simply wait for the next threat to emerge. Instead, he acted quickly and strategically, determined to safeguard both his leadership and the future of the country. In doing so, he initiated two major measures that are already reshaping Burkina Faso's security landscape. First, his administration intensified internal security across the nation, strengthening defenses and tightening control over potential threats. But the second decision carried even greater geopolitical weight. Traoré turned toward Russia, a country known for its strategic influence and assertive global posture, seeking support against the hidden networks believed to be involved in destabilizing his government. This move raised an important question. What exactly could Russia bring to the table in Burkina Faso's struggle against powerful adversaries? In a conflict shaped by regional instability and global interests, this partnership could mark a turning point. Since the failed coup attempt, Traoré's government has remained on constant alert, working tirelessly to secure the presidency and maintain stability throughout the nation. The situation escalated further when Vladimir Putin reportedly offered direct support after news surfaced of yet another alleged coup plot. For many observers, this development was hardly surprising. Over the past few years, Burkina Faso and Russia have moved closer together, building an alliance rooted in shared goals: sovereignty, strategic independence, and resistance to external domination. Traoré made global headlines in 2023 when he openly suggested that Russia had become a more dependable partner for Burkina Faso than France. According to his perspective, Russia's engagement appeared more aligned with mutual respect and strategic cooperation, while France's long-standing presence in the region had often been viewed by critics as driven by its own geopolitical interests. However, the deeper story stretches far beyond recent events. It reaches back through decades of complex relations between Burkina Faso and France. For years, France maintained a strong security presence in the country, presenting itself as a key ally in the fight against terrorism, while assisting in the training of Burkinabè forces. During the era of leaders such as Blaise Compaoré, French influence was deeply embedded in the nation's political and military structures. Supporters of Traoré argue that instead of strengthening Burkina Faso's military capabilities, this relationship gradually weakened the country's ability to defend itself independently. They claim that while France positioned itself as a protector of regional stability, the Burkinabè armed forces remained under-equipped and increasingly vulnerable as instability spread across the Sahel. In recent debates, Emmanuel Macron has defended France's role in the region, stating that French involvement helped build and support Sahelian security forces. Yet critics, including Traoré himself, have challenged this narrative, suggesting that what was portrayed as cooperation may have ultimately limited Burkina Faso's military autonomy. Traoré, drawing from his own military background, has argued that the system established during earlier decades restricted the country's ability to develop a fully independent defense structure. According to this view, agreements formed after independence placed significant influence over military training and strategy in the hands of foreign advisors under the banner of assistance. On paper, these arrangements appeared to offer technical support and expertise. In practice, however, critics argue that they reduced Burkina Faso's control over its own security policies, creating a dependency that weakened national sovereignty. Under these circumstances, the Burkinabè army faced growing challenges. Many soldiers reportedly operated with outdated equipment and limited logistical support, sometimes relying on assistance from neighboring countries to maintain basic operational readiness. For those who question the effectiveness of past partnerships, this raises difficult questions. If foreign advisors were truly committed to strengthening Burkina Faso's defense, critics ask, Why was there not a stronger push to modernize the army? Why were efforts to acquire more advanced equipment and resources often constrained? Some accounts suggest that restrictions were placed on the types of weapons Burkina Faso could purchase and even on where those weapons could be sourced. Whether due to political agreements, international regulations, or strategic calculations, these limitations contributed to the perception that the country's military independence had been compromised. For decades, successive governments largely accepted these arrangements, leaving many citizens wondering why a sovereign nation seemed unable to fully control its own defense strategy. To critics, this situation was not only puzzling, it felt deeply humiliating. The consequences were visible within the ranks of the armed forces. Many Burkinabè soldiers reportedly lived and served under extremely difficult conditions, lacking modern equipment, sufficient supplies, and adequate living facilities. Salaries were often modest, and morale within the military suffered as a result. When Traoré assumed power, he inherited an army struggling with low morale and limited resources. Troops who had been asked to defend their nation despite years of neglect and structural weakness. Under such conditions, rebuilding confidence and capability became an enormous challenge. From time to time, small numbers of Burkinabè soldiers were sent abroad, particularly to France, for specialized training. At first glance, these programs appeared to represent a genuine effort to strengthen the country's military capacity. Yet critics argue that the reality behind these initiatives was far more complex and far more controversial. These soldiers were not simply trained in modern combat techniques. According to critics of the system, many were gradually shaped into individuals whose loyalties leaned toward France, rather than toward their own country. Instead of returning home strengthened in their commitment to Burkina Faso, some allegedly came back with perspectives and connections that aligned closely with French strategic interests. If you examine the figures often associated with political instability in Burkina Faso today, many of them passed through training programs in France. To some observers, this pattern is not accidental. They believe it reflects a long-term strategy aimed at maintaining influence over the country's military and political direction. The objective, critics argue, was simple: create a system where Burkina Faso could never fully stand on its own feet. An army influenced from abroad. A nation whose security structure remained tied to external control. Meanwhile, during these years of persistent instability, the real victims were ordinary people. Thousands of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, lost their lives as terrorism and insecurity spread across the region. For many citizens, these tragedies felt like the devastating consequences of larger geopolitical struggles playing out far above their heads. When Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership, he quickly concluded that the country needed a radical shift in direction. One of his first major decisions was to end long-standing military arrangements with France and request the withdrawal of French troops from Burkinabè territory. To his supporters, this was not merely a political move. It was the first decisive step toward reclaiming genuine national sovereignty. After distancing Burkina Faso from its traditional Western partners, Traoré began searching for new alliances. In this search, he turned toward Russia, a country often at odds with Western powers, but willing to deepen cooperation with nations seeking greater independence in their security policies. Of course, critics quickly raised concerns. Some argue that Russia's growing presence in the Sahel could simply represent a shift in external influence rather than true independence. But others see the relationship differently, viewing it as a partnership born out of necessity and a shared interest in resisting external pressure. One point frequently emphasized by supporters of this new alignment is that Russia does not share the same colonial history in Africa as many Western countries. For them, this historical difference changes the entire dynamic of cooperation. In their view, Russia approaches the region without the legacy of colonial rule that continues to shape perceptions of countries like France in parts of West Africa. That colonial past still casts a long shadow over relationships in the region. The global landscape today is far different from what it was decades ago. No country can develop in isolation. International cooperation is essential, but the nature of that cooperation matters. Partnerships that are balanced and mutually beneficial tend to produce stability, while those built on dependency often create resentment. Supporters of Traoré argue that Russia's engagement with Burkina Faso appears more focused on strategic collaboration rather than resource extraction. Whether that perception proves fully accurate remains a subject of debate, but it has certainly influenced how many citizens view the evolving relationship. For decades, critics say the relationship between France and Burkina Faso often felt unequal, one side guiding the decisions while the other followed. To them, this dynamic resembled a hierarchy rather than a partnership between equals. By contrast, proponents of the Russia-Burkina Faso relationship argue that it is structured more as a collaboration between sovereign states with shared interests. They believe this balance could make the cooperation more stable and sustainable over time. Another argument often raised involves natural resources. Russia itself possesses enormous reserves of oil, gas, and other strategic commodities. Even under heavy international sanctions, the country has continued to play a major role in supplying energy to global markets. Europe's historical dependence on Russian gas illustrates just how powerful that resource base remains. France, on the other hand, lacks comparable levels of natural resources. Critics argue that this reality contributed to the country's long-standing economic relationships with many of its former colonies, where access to raw materials became an important factor in sustaining French industries. This is why some observers say Russia's engagement with African nations appears fundamentally different. It is seen less as a quest for raw materials and more as an attempt to build strategic alliances. You can already see signs of this shift through the growing number of agreements between Russia and the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states. One striking example comes from Niger. For decades, France maintained strong influence in Niger, particularly through the extraction of uranium used to power French nuclear reactors. Yet Niger itself did not develop a large domestic nuclear energy sector during those years. Now the situation is changing. After the departure of French forces, Niger recently signed a major agreement with Russia to begin developing its own nuclear energy capabilities for the first time. Even more notable is that Russia's involvement reportedly includes training Nigerian scientists and engineers. This means not only building infrastructure but also transferring technical knowledge, something many analysts consider a key element of sustainable development. Burkina Faso and Mali have also pursued similar agreements, signaling a broader wave of cooperation between Russia and Sahelian states. These partnerships are intended to address security, technology, and economic development simultaneously. Beyond economics and security, there is also a deeper ideological divide shaping the debate. Russia often presents itself as adhering to a principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of partner nations. Western countries, by contrast, are frequently accused by critics of promoting political systems and policies abroad that mirror their own models. Western governments often champion democracy as a universal standard, while criticizing countries such as China for operating under different political frameworks. However, the global reality is far more complex. In many countries, including some in Africa, democracy exists in name but struggles in practice. Elections can be influenced, political opposition may face restrictions, and power often concentrates in the hands of a small elite. For this reason, when Western governments lecture others about democratic principles, some audiences view those messages with skepticism. The debate over governance, sovereignty, and international partnerships continues to evolve. And for Burkina Faso and its neighbors, the choices being made today could shape the future of the entire Sahel region. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Supporters of closer ties with Russia often point out that Russia has generally avoided trying to impose its political system on African countries. Many Africans argue that governance models developed in Europe or North America do not always translate easily to the realities of the African continent. For decades, critics say Western powers have maintained deep involvement in Africa's political, economic, and cultural affairs. According to these critics, that involvement has frequently been shaped by a belief that Western systems and institutions represent the only acceptable path to development. This dynamic is especially visible in the structure of international financial assistance. When African countries seek loans from institutions, such as the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, they often must accept a long list of policy conditions before funds are released. These conditions can involve economic reforms, governance standards, and political expectations. If governments refuse to comply, access to those loans can be delayed or completely blocked. A recent example often cited by analysts involves the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states. After political transitions in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, these countries faced increasing pressure from international institutions and Western governments. Financial support from organizations like the IMF and World Bank became far more difficult to obtain, with calls for a return to constitutional democratic rule often cited as a requirement for renewed cooperation. Supporters of the Sahel governments view these restrictions as external pressure, while Western officials argue they are part of broader international governance standards. By contrast, countries such as Russia and China often emphasize a policy of non-interference in domestic political affairs when engaging with African partners. Their approach tends to focus more narrowly on economic and security cooperation. Agreements are typically framed around mutual benefit. If both countries see strategic value in a project, the partnership moves forward. If not, the deal simply does not proceed. To supporters of these relationships, this approach appears less intrusive than the conditional aid structures often associated with Western institutions. This difference in style is one reason why some Africans believe countries like Russia may offer a more predictable partner than traditional Western allies, such as France. In the evolving relationship between Ibrahim Traoré and Russia, proponents say both sides interact as sovereign states with shared strategic interests. They argue that this dynamic contrasts sharply with earlier periods when France played a dominant role in Burkina Faso's security decisions. Since shifting its security partnerships, Burkina Faso's military has undergone significant changes. According to officials in Ouagadougou, the country now has greater freedom to procure military equipment and develop its defense strategy without relying heavily on Western approval. Within a relatively short period, the Burkinabè armed forces have launched new operations against insurgent groups operating across the country's northern and eastern regions. Government sources claim that progress has been made in reclaiming portions of territory previously affected by extremist violence. While the conflict remains ongoing, these developments are often cited by Traoré's supporters as evidence of what can happen when a nation exercises greater control over its own defense policy. For this reason, Traoré has continued strengthening security cooperation with Russia, both to protect the state and to reinforce the stability of his government. Reports indicate that Russian advisors have provided technical and security assistance in the country, while cooperation in aviation and military equipment has expanded. Traoré himself has become an increasingly influential figure in regional politics. To many supporters across Africa, he represents a new generation of leaders determined to challenge long-standing power structures and pursue greater independence for their nations. Ensuring his security has therefore become a major priority for his administration. One event that highlighted the seriousness of Burkina Faso's security crisis occurred on June 11 of last year, when heavily armed militants launched a devastating attack on a military base in the Mansilla region near the border with Niger. The assault resulted in heavy casualties among Burkinabè soldiers and forced many civilians to flee nearby communities in fear. Analysts described the attack as one of the most severe blows suffered by the country's military since extremist insurgencies spread from Mali into Burkina Faso in 2015. According to monitoring organizations such as Site Intelligence Group, militants briefly captured the base after the attack. Videos later circulated online showing fighters moving through nearby villages and displaying weapons seized during the operation. The Mansilla assault served as a stark reminder of the scale of the security challenge facing Burkina Faso today. Targeting civilians and military installations alike represents a major escalation in the ongoing conflict. The attack also occurred at a politically sensitive moment, shortly after the extension of the country's transitional government led by Traoré. Because of this timing, some observers speculated about the possibility of external influence or geopolitical motives behind the violence. However, no definitive evidence has publicly confirmed such claims. For years, critics of Western involvement in the Sahel have argued that foreign powers sometimes benefit from prolonged instability in the region, as it provides justification for maintaining military bases and security operations. Supporters of Traoré believe such dynamics may have contributed to Burkina Faso's long struggle with insecurity. They argue that attacks on military forces could be used to portray the government as incapable of protecting the country without external intervention. Whether these suspicions prove accurate or not, one fact remains clear. Burkina Faso faces a complex battle against insurgent groups that continues to test the resilience of the state. And for President Traoré, the challenge is not only defeating terrorism, it is also proving that Burkina Faso can chart its own path towards security, stability, and sovereignty. However, an even more alarming incident unfolded almost immediately afterward. On June 12, at around 3 p.m., gunfire suddenly erupted near the headquarters of the national broadcaster Radiodiffusion Télévision du Burkina in Ouagadougou. Witnesses reported chaos in the area as shots rang out near the compound. The aftermath revealed a disturbing scene. Several vehicles were left riddled with bullet holes, and fragments of a projectile were discovered within the premises. The evidence suggested that the attack was not random, it was carefully planned. What made the situation even more sensitive was the location of the building. The RTB headquarters sits only a short distance from the presidential palace, where Ibrahim Traoré was meeting with members of his Council of Ministers at the time. Images released by RTB later showed visible damage across parts of the compound. Fortunately, only 2 people suffered minor injuries, and both were quickly treated by the Presidential Health Service. Yet the deeper meaning of the attack was clear to many observers. This was not simply an assault on a media facility. It appeared to be a direct signal aimed at the heart of Burkina Faso's leadership and the stability of the state itself. Despite the failure of earlier attempts to destabilize the government, attention quickly shifted toward what might happen next. In the days that followed, Russia publicly reaffirmed its support for Burkina Faso. During a press briefing in Moscow, Sergei Lavrov stated that Russian instructors had already been working in Burkina Faso for some time, and that their presence would continue to grow. According to Lavrov, these instructors have been playing a significant role in helping strengthen both Burkina Faso's armed forces and its internal security structures. He also confirmed that Russia would continue supplying military equipment intended to improve the country's ability to confront armed insurgent groups operating in the region. Lavrov acknowledged that Burkina Faso had maintained a neutral position regarding the war in Ukraine, but it was his final remarks that drew the most attention. He emphasized that Russia stands ready to assist Burkina Faso in resisting what he described as forms of modern neo-colonial pressure. The message from Moscow was unmistakable. Russia intended not only to support Burkina Faso's fight against insurgency, but also to stand by President Traoré in the face of any attempts to undermine his leadership. True to these words, Russia reportedly moved quickly following the June 11 attack and growing rumors of unrest within parts of the Burkinabè military. According to diplomatic sources in Africa, 2 aircraft carrying Russian instructors soon landed in Burkina Faso. The planes were said to have departed from Mali, another country that has recently strengthened security cooperation with Russia. Independent reports indicated that some of these instructors were linked to former members of the Wagner Group, many of whom are now believed to be operating under a restructured unit, often referred to as the Africa Corps. Their mission appears to serve 2 primary purposes: improving Burkina Faso's military capabilities and helping ensure the personal security of President Traoré as tensions remain high. For Moscow, maintaining stability in Burkina Faso also carries strategic significance. Since many Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia following the Ukraine conflict, Moscow has sought to strengthen partnerships with nations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In this context, Traoré has emerged as one of the leaders openly advocating closer cooperation with Russia. For the Kremlin, maintaining a stable government in Burkina Faso and preserving its partnership with Traoré therefore carries geopolitical importance. Both countries now appear committed to expanding their cooperation, preventing instability, and ensuring that Burkina Faso can pursue its security agenda without external interference. At the same time, Traoré has not relied solely on foreign partnerships to safeguard his leadership. From the moment he took office, he initiated sweeping reforms within Burkina Faso's own security apparatus. One of his earliest moves involved restructuring the elite presidential guard responsible for protecting the head of state. This process went far beyond a routine reshuffle. Traoré personally reviewed the backgrounds of the guard's members, removing anyone whose loyalty appeared uncertain and replacing them with individuals he believed had proven their commitment to the nation. Even those with strong records were required to undergo further scrutiny. Potential members were subjected to an extensive vetting process that examined their education, family networks, political affiliations, and any international connections that could raise concerns. Only candidates who passed this rigorous screening were accepted into the reformed presidential guard. The result was the creation of a tightly controlled security unit composed of individuals considered highly loyal and dependable. Combined with the broader modernization of the armed forces and Russia's continued assistance, these internal reforms have significantly strengthened the protective structure surrounding President Traoré. Today, he confronts political and security challenges with both a revitalized military and a carefully vetted security team dedicated to defending the leadership of the state. For now, anyone attempting to undermine his government will face a far more formidable barrier than before. Share your thoughts in the comments below. On this channel, we explore Africa's history, its culture, and its ongoing struggle for sovereignty and self-determination. Join the movement, subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of the journey to restore Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Together, let's spread awareness, inspire change, and protect the truth. Thanks for watching.